it up. I really enjoyed that last session, and I'm going to start with a couple of questions. Raise your hand if you agree that a team with a growth mindset is likely to outperform a team with a fixed mindset. Okay, just checking, we're all on board here. Raise your hand again if you believe that a team with a growth mindset not only is likely to outperform a team with a fixed mindset, but the retention and attraction rates are likely to be way higher for that business. Absolutely. Now, let's make this clear, and I'm sure we'll all agree with this, that in an organisation, there ain't just one culture, is there? If you've got 30 managers, you are going to have 30 microcultures. Do we all agree with that? Now, unfortunately, we can find sometimes in businesses unhealthy culture, can't we? To give you some examples of that, and unfortunately we've probably all been exposed to some of these, there can be a culture of fear, shame and blame around mistake making, right? Teams can be uncollaborative, rigid, scared of adversity, change or growth. The list goes on. Or we come over here where we experience thriving cultures, which is what we're all here wanting for our business, of course, where we get that collaboration. We get people leaning into their comfort, out of their comfort zones to achieve the extraordinary. That's how much I love that video. We get thriving cultures where people are collaborating, they're leaning out of a comfort zone, they're thinking bigger, they're experimenting, they're supporting each other, the psychological safety is great, trust is rife, and all the good stuff. Now, in order to get from that place over there to this place over here, as Clive alluded to earlier, is a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment, and it requires thinking bigger. And I want to talk specifically today about the importance of growth mindset in a team and the link between that and high performance. So I'm Anna. I'm a high performance coach and trainer, and I am founder of 80. So 80 is a growth academy, and we get leaders and their teams mentally fit, nurturing high performance culture so that they can achieve for the business extraordinary results. We're not about the ordinary at 80. It's about breaking through the barriers. And I've had the privilege of working with some fantastic companies, including LinkedIn, L'Oreal, Boots, Holland & Barrett, and some others you may know. But I work with businesses with my team all over the place, of all sizes, across multiple industries. And I am passionate about the link between mental fitness and performance. And this is a link that often gets missed, and I know this has been brought up today. There's something about me you should know though. I'm a recovering perfectionist. Can anyone relate to perfectionism in this room? I know that a lot of you, if not all of you, are going to be high performers, and what I find is with high achievers, perfectionism can often be a lens that ironically holds us back from achieving our optimum. Now, how is my perfectionism, or ex-perfectionism should I say now, because I've done a lot of self-work, how is that related to this? Well, back in 2017, and I'll just top line this because I know we've not got all the time to play with here, but back in 2017, when I was in a global leadership role, I've got a 15-year career working in various leadership roles in sales and marketing, by the way. And at this point, I was working full-time with 2 kids. I had a 3-year-old that had just gone back to nursery, or started nursery, sorry, and a baby, and I'd gone back to work in this global role, expected to travel. And let me take you back to a moment when I was in the car, driving. The rain was pelting on the windscreen. You know, one of those dreary, awful, miserable days. And I felt totally and utterly broken. I was a high achiever at the time. I was expecting myself to achieve 110% across all aspects of life. I wanted to have lost the baby weight, be the amazing wife I wanted to be the best leader ever, be the best mum that's present all the time. And was that possible? Absolutely not. I can see people shaking their heads. You can probably predict what happened. I was driving in that car, feeling overwhelmed, crying, not even really knowing why I was crying. I was so confused. But I want to tell you how critical that inner voice was at the time. You're a shit mum. Why did you not make the time to make the packed lunch today? Why did your husband have to do it? You're neglecting him. You can't even be present in the forecasting meeting. You can't tailor your approach to your team. You're too forgetful. It was brutal. And at that moment, I knew I was having a breakdown. And without going into the full story, that's what spurred me into getting help myself and becoming a coach and a trainer. And perfectionism is linked to this because I was so fixed in my mindset. I was rigid. I had a high level of control. I only know all this in hindsight. I was fearful of showing myself up. I wouldn't ask questions. I had to be seen as being the best all the time or it wasn't good enough. Wouldn't ask questions, as I say. Wouldn't step out of my comfort zone. And stifled, ironically, my own growth, despite being a high achiever. Anyway, let's lighten this up a bit. It's a bit depressing over there. Right, here's a little game for you. How many triangles can you see? Just spend a few seconds counting how many triangles you can see. Right, let's have some shout-outs. Can you just shout out a number? There's no right or wrong necessarily at this point. 8?
None.
11? Look at it, that's a lot. Well done. Any other numbers?
0.
0.
There's no triangles.
There's no... Right, we've got a smart ass in the corner here. Because interestingly, there are no triangles in this picture. Now I could go off on one on distortion and how the brain sees what we expect to see, which is a great point to make, but what I just want to focus on there is the diversity of thought in the room and the fact that we're all seeing the same thing there from a completely different perspective. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So when we go into businesses and we motivate and upskill teams, get them mentally fit, thinking bigger, adopting a growth mindset, these are the common barriers across every industry. It doesn't matter what the company is, these things usually come up. Lack of accountability. And I'm not going to focus in on any of them too much, I just thought it'd be interesting to share. Blame culture is really common. I'm sure you can all relate to this. Blaming why we're stressed on workload or just passing the blame left, right and centre. Blaming another department as to why we're failing. Over-dependency on the leader can be included in that. Stress and overwhelm is massive, and we all know that the markets can throw mega curveballs, that if your team have not got the ability to be agile and they haven't got that resilience we're talking about today, it can be incredibly overwhelming. Poor leadership comes up all the time. Imposter syndrome is huge, often what keeps us in our comfort zones, is it not? And perfectionism, as I've alluded to already, is so common amongst high achievers. Fear of change and adversity is another one. However, my major point here is that there is a barrier that is often missed by organisations, and it is the biggest one without a doubt, and it is fixed mindset. You saw in that video, you may have noticed, 90% of your team's thoughts, 90% roughly, are the same as they had yesterday. 90% of your thoughts are the same as you had yesterday. And isn't that interesting and in some ways very worrying? Now, we're all stuck on autopilot, and I won't go into too much detail here in the interest of time, but most of us are aware that it's the beliefs and the values we hold, the programs that are running, the repetitive thoughts every day. We have roughly 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day, roughly, and we're just systems on repeat, stuck in a rut, if you like, repeating the same thoughts, feelings, behaviours, and getting the same results over and over. I mean, who hasn't seen this quote before? But never has this been so hard-hitting and poignant to me than considering it in the light of team performance. So, growth mindset. I can imagine most of you have quite a good idea of what it is. I'm definitely not here to teach you to suck eggs, but let's just focus in on it just quickly. At 80, we believe it's split into two key areas. One, it's a belief that our abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort. A lot of you will have heard of Carol Dweck. She's the lovely lady who coined the phrase fixed and growth mindset. And of course it's about getting out of your comfort zone. I don't even need to tell you that bit, surely. The second aspect is about thinking bigger, which is a slightly different angle to look at growth mindset from, which I'll come to a little bit later, but it had to hone in on that. Now, if we look at the individual, before I move on to teams, let's just top line this very quickly. A fixed mindset person, they are likely to, like the old me, be fearful of asking questions. They're going to want to stay in their comfort zone. They're going to see outcomes as they're going to see a direct link between an outcome and themselves. They're not going to like feedback because they believe they are the finished article. Now, you do not want people in your team believing they're the finished article for obvious reasons, right? They're going to be offended likely by feedback. And there's lots of other things. Stress and overwhelm is a big thing if there's sudden change or overwhelm. Stress and overwhelm, if there's sudden change or a curveball comes in their way. They're going to be rigid in their thinking. Quite obvious, probably. Now, the growth mindset person, as I'm sure you're all aware, believes they are a work in progress. Now, this is where we all want to be. This is high performance right here. That mindset is super important because in order to get better requires progression. If we want to progress, we've got to step out of our comfort zone. So I'm going to have to accept that discomfort is part of the process, realise that if I keep putting more effort into something, I can cultivate and learn new skills to get better. And that's what growth mindset's all about. Lots more I could talk about here, but I'm going to move on in the interest of time. This is the big takeaway, of course, that I'm sure we all agree, discomfort equals growth. And I must say those words multiple times every day, and I live by it. I seek out discomfort. Never used to, by the way. I used to avoid it like the plague. But that's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And by the way, you may relate more to one than the other, of course, but do recognise that in aspects of your life you may be more growth mindset focused, and in other aspects of your life more fixed. So it's a really interesting one in terms of raising that self-awareness, which I agree is the starting point. Have a reflection on that. Another really important point with growth mindset, of course, is that the focus is on the journey rather than the end result. It's about the progress. It's about learning from the mistakes we're making along the way. It's about praising effort, realising that there ain't no finish line. That's one of my favourite lines. There ain't, until the day we die. Let's leave that bit out. But there ain't no finish line. There's always a chance to get better and to grow. So let's hone in now on teams in business, because this is what this is all about. And obviously there's a big link here to high performance. It's already been noted today, and I know we're all on board with this, but psychological safety and trust is a must. We have to be creating the right environment for our teams to be able to thrive and adopt a growth mindset in the first place. That is paramount. But why is it within our interest to get our teams adopting a growth mindset? Why is that? Well, firstly, it's an obvious point maybe, but to innovate. We all will agree, I'm sure, that all the best companies out there, the most successful companies, innovate. Throw me some names of some companies that come to mind, if you don't mind. When I say the word innovation, what companies do you think of that do this well? Apple, good one. Unilever. Dyson, right, yeah, I agree with all of those. Isn't it interesting, at Apple, they asked this fantastic question, have you made enough mistakes today? I love that. The old me would have flipping hated that question. What do you mean a mistake? I want to be making mistakes, how shameful. Making a mistake is part of the journey of learning, isn't it, of course? So innovation doesn't just mean, obviously, product design and development. We innovate in many ways. It's improving ways of working. It's innovating in terms of systems and processes of communication. It's not just, of course, about the actual product itself. I always think about Toyota when it comes to innovation. You heard of Kaizen, the Kaizen method? Mm-hmm. It's great, isn't it? This idea of 1% improvement on a daily basis, ideally. Marginal gains. At Toyota, they get their teams to submit a new idea every month of how they can improve, how the business can improve. And their supervisor has a meeting with them about it. And 99% of the ideas put forward get put into action. How great is that? Isn't that amazing? I do not see that in many companies at all, and I think there's a lot to be learned from that model. Also, Microsoft, interestingly, you may know this, but since Nadella became CEO in 2014, their stock price has increased 7 times, as a result of him implementing a growth mindset culture. So this translates to results. Innovation is important. Growth mindset in general makes companies money and saves companies money. And this is going to become very clear. I'm sure you're on board with this already. CQ, who's heard of CQ? It's quite a new thing, and I really like this. This stands for change intelligence. We've all heard of emotional intelligence and IQ. Change intelligence. We want our teams to be adopting a growth mindset so that they can be agile in the face of adversity. This requires resilience, and I'm going to come more to resilience in a minute. But we want our teams to be adaptive. If we look at, I'm thinking where CQ really shows up. Netflix have evolved so well. They have jumped on market opportunities. They have accepted technological changes, and they have made such progress as a result of their adaptability. Google, I know, also are really proud of how agile their teams are. They recognise that stress has come down, that adaptability has improved since implementing a growth mindset culture. And then we've got cognitive diversity, which I'm sure we can all imagine why this is so important. So without cognitive diversity, say there's a problem in the business. Let's say there's a curveball, it's unforeseen, we've got a problem to solve. If we've got a load of employees in the team with the same mindset or with the same perception, we stay in this corner and we experience collective blindness. Groupthink, it came up earlier. We don't want that collective blindness, do we? We want people with different viewpoints, different backgrounds, all types of diversity. You guys know all about that, of course. But cognitive diversity really allows us to come at problem solving from all of these different angles, which is incredibly valuable. Now, going back to this, David, you said 0. Someone said 0, but lots of you said the wrong answer, right? But the more people we've got seeing a problem from different angles, the more likely we're going to solve it. And that's really powerful, I think. Connection, it's an obvious one. I won't spend too long on this one, but connection, of course, is super valuable. And why does a growth mindset culture in a business drive connection? Because in order to achieve a growth mindset culture, we need to nurture vulnerability, welcome vulnerability. And with vulnerability, every time you will drive connection. An example of this, a recruitment company that I'm working with at the moment, they are extremely open now. Like Clive was saying, the importance of continuous feedback. Well, this continuous feedback happens up to down to up, and they will share not only best practice, but they will share mistakes that have been made, they will share the learnings, and that vulnerability has taken that culture to a whole nother level. Employee engagement has never been so great, and retention too, as a result. So, quite an obvious point probably, but there are so many benefits to instilling a growth mindset culture, and retention and attraction are another one. Making the company money, saving the company money, as I said. But do you know what my major message is here today? Something I'm really passionate about. I believe so many businesses are missing a trick when it comes to high performance culture. I believe you cannot have a high performance culture without mental fitness first. If your leaders and your teams are not mentally fit, I believe they will not have the capacity to be able to think bigger, the clarity, the word came up earlier, the clarity to be able to adapt their leadership style, to be able to think bigger in the face of adversity. They're just not going to be able to work smart if they've not got that headspace. And it's not as simple as just training someone to get mentally fit. I'm going to come back to that slide because I want to use this analogy of the slide, of the shard. Before I do, I want to acknowledge, I know that Clive and Victoria brought this up earlier, or alluded to it. Physical fitness matters. We need to be physically fit for our brains to work properly, right? We can all acknowledge that. But when it comes to mental fitness, which is a key ingredient of high performance, there's something deeper beneath mental fitness that's important first, and I think businesses are missing it. I use this analogy of the shard to describe a person. So if we've got someone with really deep foundations, just like the shard, they are, let's call them the psychological foundations. I'm going to just refer to those as beliefs. The foundations represent their beliefs. I'm going to talk specifically about self-belief right now. We need high levels of self-belief first, before we can become mentally fit. Because for me, there's lots of ways to define mental fitness, but for me it's being able to be present, it's having the headspace to think bigger. There's lots of things that come into mental fitness, but we're not going to achieve that if we don't feel confident in ourselves first, to raise our self-awareness, to be able to think bigger, to be able to emotionally regulate, manage our thoughts effectively, and all the skills that tie into mental fitness. You can't just do that unless you first have that self-belief. So I think that's a really important point. And I want to now bring your attention to what I call the high performance zone. I'm very passionate about this image here. So this is the high performance zone. At the lower end of the stressometer, work balance came up earlier as well. It is so important that everybody in our teams understands that it ain't cool to operate at the high level of the stressometer. It's not cool to be busy. It's where burnout happens. It's the reason I had a breakdown when I was that perfectionist. I must have been up at a 9 or 10 pretty much all the time. And I see it all the time in my friends and loved ones as well. I recognise it in people around me, as I'm sure you do. But the higher the number is on that stressometer, let's say 10 is the breakdown, the higher the number is, guess what? The less you can think straight. The more likely you are to be believing the narrative in your head. The less productive you are. The more you're making decisions based on emotion, not fact. The more tunnel vision you have. We perform worse the higher the number is on that stressometer. Where the magic happens is on the lower end, where we can think more smartly. We have the clarity to tailor our approach. We can become self-aware. We make decisions based on fact, not emotion. This is where the sweet spot is. And I don't think enough people understand the value of this and how to achieve this in business. I don't think there's enough training around it, if I'm honest. I think we go straight in with, even if you're receiving growth mindset training, I think there's a missing link. What about the mental fitness piece first? And do your team know how to deepen their foundations? Do they know how to build high self-esteem before we start any of this? Because that is the first step. So here are some watch outs that I find when it comes to instilling a growth mindset culture within a business. Have I got everybody on board with agreeing that it is absolutely a positive thing to instill a growth mindset culture for a business? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Employee engagement's going to go up, the company is likely to innovate more, make more money, save more money, retention rates improve, all these great things. But these are some of the watch outs that I have experienced. And I bet you won't be surprised by this top one. I can even hear some giggles, it's true, right? So often there is a fixed mindset at the top. Forget nurturing a growth mindset in your team if your leaders aren't practicing company values and practicing growth mindset themselves. Interestingly, what I often find, or sometimes find, but I will actually say it is often, the more senior people that I coach, let's say CEOs of companies, for example, often they can be the ones with the most fixed mindset because they're so stuck in a rut of doing something the same way. With time, they almost get themselves more and more stuck. Does that make sense? So what are they modelling to the rest of the company? Lack of training is a problem. I'm passionate at 80 about going into businesses and getting teams mentally fit first, before we even talk about growth mindset and how to adopt a growth mindset. Let's get them thinking bigger. Let's get them comfortable with being uncomfortable first, because they ain't going to be able to step out of their comfort zone if they haven't got that skill set and haven't built that resilience first. Does that make sense? And then how often do we neglect emerging leaders? How often do we put people into managerial positions because they're good at their job without upskilling them on how to lead? But it's not even that that's the most important, without making sure they're mentally fit first and then upskilling them on how to lead. So there's a big opportunity I find here. Just grab my water. Oh, this is an interesting one. I'm sure you know what I'm going to say here. Right, a dominant leader. Let me draw another pretty picture for you. This won't surprise you, I'm sure. It doesn't matter how many frames of reference you've got in a team, how much the cognitive diversity there is. If you've got a leader who is a dominant leader, you might as well cancel all that out. So this is something that often gets overlooked. Dominant leaders, in many ways, are stifling the growth of their teams. And I'm really hoping this is getting people thinking bigger. I know a lot of you will understand some of this stuff already. I really don't want to stand up here teaching you to suck eggs at all, but I do really want to get people thinking bigger, because you've all got crazy lives, you work hard, and it's so precious when we come to a day like this to take a step back and think bigger. It's almost a bit like a life audit. Sounds a bit deep, but I was talking to some people at the break. It's really important to reflect on this stuff. Psychometric testing. Oh, this is an interesting one. I am all for psychometric testing. I think it is really powerful and important to understand the profiles within your business. It drives communication. We can understand how to tailor our approach to get the most out of people, how to influence. All that is fantastic. And obviously I use these tools too. However, here's the watch out. How often do I see in businesses that they have insights, Myers-Briggs or whatever, but effectively it's like putting people in a box, giving them a label and then letting it just fall by the wayside. There is a growth mindset piece that is missing. There is a growth mindset piece that is missing where we need to upskill our teams with mental fitness, deepen and build their self-belief so that no matter what their personality profile or preference, they're able to flex into the other styles. Does that make sense? And I really get excited about teaching companies about this because it really can drive such fantastic growth. And then we've got perfectionist leaders. Just quickly, they can be fixed, they can nurture a culture of shame and blame and fear around mistake making, they can model a terrible work-life balance if they're an extreme perfectionist. So it's a big fat watch out. So I'm going to just rattle on through because I know we're short on time. We've got to nurture a growth mindset culture, of course, but how do we do that? Anyone thinking, why the hell is there a lobster up there? Probably one of my favourite analogies. I'll top line it very quickly. Lobsters shed their shell about 25 times before they're 5 to 7 years old. The stimulus for shedding their shell is that they're so deeply uncomfortable because their body's growing underneath it, their mushy body, that they have to get rid of the shell. They shed the shell. They go hide under a rock. Their mushy body is so vulnerable to predatory fish that they go and hide under this rock. But my main point here is that the stimulus is growth. And you want a team full of lobsters. So we even deliver a workshop called Be More Lobster. Because I love this analogy. It's great, right? I've put my clicker down. What have I done with it? There it is. Anyone going to disagree with that? So true, isn't it? And that's the whole lobster thing. We need our teams to be able to get vulnerable, but that psychological safety, the trust, the suitable environment for them to be able to make mistakes is crucial. So how do we do it? Top line. We start from the top. Let's get our leaders mentally fit first. Let's make them the disciples of our values, practicing our values, because if they're not, it ain't going to feed down. It's not going to feed down to the organisation. Let's make sure the teams are mentally fit. Let's not neglect mental health, mental fitness training as part of this journey. Let's recognise that failure is power. Let's fail forwards. Learning labs, failure forums, having mentors to help people through, challenging people in new ways, all part of this process. Effort and characteristics rather than obsessing just over the numbers and the end result. Because guess what? If we get the journey right, of course we're going to get better results. It makes total sense. And let's recruit mindfully. Diversity I won't go into, but I'm sure everyone's on board with why that's so important. Cognitive diversity, of course, is crucial in growth mindset. But are we recruiting people that suit our culture? Are we testing their ability to nurture a growth mindset? or respond well to being nurtured to have a growth mindset? Are we asking questions around growth mindset? Because surely these are the individuals that we want most in our business. And hopefully I've got you thinking a little bit bigger today. I know you're all very capable individuals. You're in HR, a lot of you already. But I hope I've got you thinking a little bit bigger. This stat is real. We need to be wary of it. It's not an easy path, but absolutely it's possible to nurture a growth mindset culture with the right commitment, strategy, focus and support. It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.